get their experience and what the public are saying. Now, it's been going on a while now. We're coming to the last week. This is the last week of it. They'll introduce themselves.
David Warr, standing in St Helier South.
Nicola Cornu, again, St Helier South, for deputy.
For deputy,
For deputy
yes.
as well.
Yes.
Now, Nick's done, he's stood for this seat before under a different name. Not his different name, the seat was called District Number 1, or used to be. But this is a new experience for Dave. So I want to hear from you, fresh, out there, going on the stump, is that what they call
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting because I have talked to a lot of people before I stood, or as I was, beginning the process, and all the messages are, get out there, knock on the doors, get your literature out there, get your team around you, all the sort of standard issue stuff, Actually, I think what I've seen is complete rubbish. I'm going to be polite on this video clip, because I think we've underestimated how much people are just disinterested. I think there's a huge apathy to it all. And the challenge for us, actually, as candidates, is to actually get in front of people and how we find that. And the mechanism today, in my humble opinion now, is Facebook, it's Twitter, it's social media. Everybody has a phone on their hand, and can you flash your message up in front of them during their daily life?
I had a discussion about these sorts of things yesterday with Tony Moretta. Before we get on to that, there's a thumping music going on, and my camera, being an annoying little beast that it is, will pick that up.
Okay.
Oh, can you do anything about it?
I'll stop it
Thanks.
for a second. Okay.
Well, we shot the musicians, so that's okay. We've now got a greater degree of. One of the things that people don't appreciate, if there is music in the background, sometimes Google, whoever in charge, will cancel your video. They'll say there's a copyright issue because there's music in the background.
Okay.
So you've got to be careful on this. I mean, you learn these things.
Okay.
So yesterday, I interviewed Tony Moretta yesterday, and of course he's a great computerist. He believes in computers. And we were this very issue about. With press a button, you can circulate 1,000 people, but you don't know who they are.
Correct.
You don't know. You don't know what.
And interestingly enough, if you want to target on Facebook, for instance, if you want to quote boost your post, the island is so small, or South St Helier is even smaller than the island. Your boosted post goes to everybody in the island, even though they can't vote for you.
Exactly.
So there's another irony. Yeah.
That's right, and it will give the public. I presume they will get tired of the stuff arriving at all. I mean, 93 candidates. It doesn't concern most people. People in your patch are just concerned with a dozen, plus constable,
Yes.
So that's as much as people, even on a good day,
get their head around. Yeah.
Absolutely. What about you, Nick? You've done it before. Is it the same?
The situation is worse, actually, because of people's socio-economic position is much, much worse. But in a sense, and I kind of predicted this, it's forced them out. One speaks to the 30-somethings, and the first issue is affordable housing, rents, and so on. It's coming out of their mouths. It's not me trying to induce something from them. They're actually coming out. I mean, I registered one chap in this next block last night, and he was very pleased. He wasn't sure whether the 10th was the cut-off, whether he could get on now, so I put him on the supplementary. I also put his girlfriend on. He was going to ring her. She's in Turkey. She'll no doubt be on. And they were concerned about films, which he does, culture, the lack of support by government of those kind of areas, and generally everyone's being forced into finance, and he didn't like that. He was more of he wanted to be culturally independent.
Strange enough, as far as subject matter is, it seems, from my memory, I haven't researched it, but I remember elections of old. And there's always an issue or two which grab that election. Because somebody starts it off and everybody runs with it for some reason. Now, housing, I suspect, is the issue here for this one. But in fact, I wonder what percentage of people that you're going to meet on your, because you knock on the door, that means they're living somewhere, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah.
So they're not the worst possible case, because the worst possible case is homelessness. That's it. So how do you know people aren't just mouthing what's the current thought? Do you get any feedback on that?
I mean, I think it's from my staff. We have 30 people on our books. The issues around accommodation, where they can live. We have this qual, non-qual issue, which is a rolling one. I mean, these guys are not having kids. They're, all of the, social norms are kind of delayed whilst they try and build up enough or get their pay moving in the right direction so that they can afford a step up within the accommodation sector. So I personally see it an awful lot from our staff as the biggest issue. One of the funny things, though, is for the first time ever, 3 of my staff have actually bought their first home, which is the first time I think in about a decade. So one of them's got help with Andium, no deposit, and done that. And interestingly enough, I had an email from somebody, a young mum who's just had her first child, about childcare and the cost of housing to them, saying it's impossible. So I pointed them in the direction of Andium and said, look, see what Andium can offer you, maybe you can do something there. The other 2 basically have had the help of mum and dad, and the third one, what's the third one? They've just got a massively long mortgage. So in other words, it used to be all 20 years, now it's out to 30 years. They've managed to put a little bit of a deposit together and so forth. So people are getting very, very creative, those who wish to step on the housing ladder, and that's pretty stressful.
Of course, the emotive term is always young people to get on the ladder of, and all that sort of expression. Whereas as I've said to you before at one of your meetings, I'm 77. If I bought, I'd be a first-time buyer.
Yeah.
That is not what they have in mind.
No.
But people of my age have to be housed somewhere. It's a reality problem, but it's not the one that's on the agenda, is it?
And I think that the other big thing not on the agenda right now is people talk, well, it's interesting, population used to be this big thing everybody was terrified of and going, oh God, they're going to be, pull up the drawbridge, sorry. Everybody's realised there's a major problem out there for businesses like ours, hospitality. Well, it's everything, isn't it? Care workers, everybody across the board. It's not just Jersey, it's the UK, etc., where there's a huge part. And interestingly enough, that hasn't come up hugely. But what the biggest story for me is the demographic change. This growing, your area, this aging population who are simply they're not being thought about. I mean, this is a 20-year project, and I know we're only potentially get in for 4 years. But we have to start thinking about these 20-year projects and what we're going to do and how we're going to maintain people's, standard of living, I think is probably the simplest way to put it.
Nick's bumping into people.
No, I'm listening and I'm endorsing everything that's being said.
You're cribbing his sheet.
Thank you.
No, I've heard exactly the same thing.
Yes, yeah.
But you've been meeting people that you've electioneered for in different parishes, St Bernard's. You've knocked on doors and they remember you. So there is a sort of an awareness. And it goes back a long time. But there's situations, it would be interesting to know those people that you interviewed years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, whether housing was a big issue for them then. Have they moved on in their big issue?
They owned property in Kennervay Park.
Right.
I think they sold up, took some cash, moved to Montmilley, reasonably happy. However, the husband has had a stroke, so that's an obvious issue. And I've met many cases like that, particularly carer. One or other of the partners has got Alzheimer's, and the other one is struggling to look after them, and it's really, really sad. And with aging and frailty, they're unable to get out of the house. And
that damn music is playing again.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure it's us actually.
Oh, somebody else.
Somebody else. Unfortunately, sorry.
Beyond our control.
Okay, out of our control, that one. Yeah, I mean, the one thing, and Nick's alluding to a bit, is long-term healthcare.
Right.
I've had a couple of emails about individuals who scrimped and saved all their lives, had a lump sum of money. They're now they're in their 70s. They now need long-term healthcare. They're getting assessed, and what they don't understand is how it is that at the end of their day, when they eventually pass on and pass their house or whatever their assets on, their long-term healthcare bill will be taken out of anything that they've saved. And they don't understand how someone who hasn't saved or hasn't done anything still gets the same level of treatment, the same level of care. And I think to me, and I'm at a different end of that spectrum, to me there's some inherent injustice there, and I feel like it's only going to get worse as the years go on, as we have this demographic time bomb going through our society.
Well, it's hitting us now because there are so many people, we hear it all the time, like the last few weeks, there are people who are fit to be discharged from hospital. There's nowhere for them to go, and their own homes, wherever that might be, own it, rent it, whatever they do, are not adapted for disability. And it doesn't improve.
Well, I've done a lot of home visits, maybe 50 or 60, whereby the DGREF goes to visit people, and that's from necessity. I did very few in 2018 when I stood, and that's because I'm discovering couples who are, or individuals who are stuck in their homes. They can't even get beyond the balcony, or I know they would never get down to vote unless they were aided and assisted, and that is the best way when the Gref comes and sees them. It's tremendous, and they're incredibly grateful. And I've had the feedback from it. People who started getting calls yesterday and were visited. I followed them up, and they said, "Yeah, it was tremendous. It was great. The guy stood at the door. We went off and filled it, put in an envelope, put in another envelope, handed it back. No pressure. Great."
Well, I used to campaign on disability issues. I wasn't disabled, but as time has gone on, it's caught up with me. I am quite, mobility-wise, I've got quite a few problems. So you begin to appreciate directly, once it hits you personally. Now, there will be loads of people who are 15 years on in life, they were okay when they're, back then.
Yes,
All of a sudden now, they're wanting special accommodation. And it's not there. I don't know.
Ground floors is often sought after, so that they can get outside.
I think
not use stairs or lifts or whatever.
I mean, I was going to say about isolation, and this is the problem. People get isolated, don't they? And it's one of the big themes for me is about communities. I mean, I know this is me talking about my manifesto or whatever, but I always say one St Helier, many communities. But I don't think that just applies to St Helier. I think that applies to all of the parishes as well. I think it's really... We have to grasp that idea, because community is kind of an old-fashioned idea, isn't it? When everybody used to know their neighbour, they would help out and do that kind of thing. I think community now, in such an incredibly transient world that we live in, is actually more important today than it ever has been. So, and also because of longevity, people living their lives for longer. Just around the corner, one place I have, there's for over 50s, you can get a special accommodation. And so I know one friend of mine who's moving out of a large house and moving into this, just so they actually have some company around community around them. And I think we have to really seek that out, importantly, and that from the planners and all the rest of it. I think.
Well, of course, the planners, unfortunately, they're fixated upon creating zones, which to me is the kiss of death to normal life, because people don't work like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously get, if a place is surviving, its business is the sea, there will be a harbour, there will be things happen. But they have this obsession now. The countryside here, for some reason, is sacred. Not something I go along with, but there's a desperate need for houses in the countryside, but they can't be remote houses. They've got to be amongst other houses. The bus service has got to have a reason to go there and all that sort of thing. So you can't just look at things and say, we cram everything, as you know, your town deputy potential. They can't keep piling it all in, as you well know. But what do you, as town deputy, where are you saying housing development should take place? Nick?
Well, outside. I mean, we hear, in St Clements, Hustings, we must have housing, but not in St Clements. Grooville, we must have housing for our young Jersey people, but not in Grooville. And so it goes on. So there has to be more building out in those other areas. It'll only be achieved through political will, pressure from St Helier deputies saying, hold on, no more high density in St Helier without amenities. Think about building in other parishes, and that's going to require a big political battle, because you've got 12
Why don't people join it up? I mean, it was very pronounced at the St Clements, which is my parish, and there was a big call, we want more houses, but not in this parish.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was really strange.
The NIMBY syndrome, I mean, I think again, this is not being in government, this is someone outside seeing buildings. St Helier House is a classic example for me. 4 years that's been debated about. It's owned by the parish of St Helier. It's a multi-storey at the north end of People's Park, and it's sitting there empty. Now, it's got all sorts of reasons why it's empty. It's because of the cladding, it's because of the dreadful fire at Grenfell, and all these things.
And it is the anniversary at the moment.
Yeah, but we have to move on. Someone said to me, but they haven't. Yeah, okay, that's Grenfell. But we as a community have to move on and push for new things. We've got Le Bar Centre. Reform keep having a go at me for saying we must get on with extending the Millennium Park across to St Saviour's Road, which I think is absolutely vital. Reform turn around and say, well, actually, we agree with you, David, but we wanted people to have an option on a school. Now, if there's no way of building a school there, why are we not looking at the Le Bar Centre and all these other areas? But the problem is no one's joining up the dots. They're not going, and I come back to communities. Shouldn't there be a school on the south of St Helier? It seems insane there isn't a school down here, and it's not in the Jersey Development Company's remit either, as part of their social thing.
We've been hearing the same discussions about sites for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Ever since the Barrett Plan, 1965, I think it was, I've heard the same discussion going on. Now, if politicians are coming to the States and saying this is what we must do, but don't do it, how far removed is that from the Boris syndrome of telling absolute lies? Because there's no way. They just don't do what they're going to say they're going to do.
Well, the state is divided between the executive and the rest, and the executive take the decisions. And the civil servants align with those policies established by the executive. And if you're not part of the executive, then you've got to blame the executive. And unfortunately that...
You're talking about the chief ministers, are you, or the top table?
The top table, absolutely.
Should be. It's not something that I've heard it discussed, but people say about the code of conduct for states members. Now, should there be a more accessible process for getting rid of people out of the states? All this jamboree about getting them elected, and it's all good fun for those who enjoy it, but getting them out of the states, to me, is rather more important, because if they go in there on a promise and do nothing about it...
There's an election at the end. Otherwise, removing them by any other process is a defiance of the democratic will. And we've had a judgment on that, haven't we? Which is called Wickenden from the Royal Court, about reference to Greek juntas and things. Nonsense. Very peculiar, but it seems the democratic will trumps everything.
But there have been, like in the child inquiry, for example, there was a states member who was labelled as a liar. But he carried on being a states member. There was the chief minister didn't say, well, I'm not having you in my government.
And sadly, Boris Johnson's just gone and set the bar even lower.
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of almost can't help himself. And and I think that's a tragedy for democracy in the UK. It's really interesting. You kind of have these thoughts overnight where you're going, well, if I was elected, it would all be different. And of course, we all want to do that. But I think it's really important that whoever gets to sit on that top table looks at all of the manifestos of all the different people who stood, and analyses what the topics are, what the key issues are. We inherently know, we're fairly familiar with them all, but I would like to see a list of 1 to 20 of all the different...
my thought.
I think then we might actually get something going. But the other thing I really want to do is this talking and talking and talking in the States Chambers. I didn't know this. You're not allowed to interrupt somebody. They're given their 15 minutes of fame, as it were, to talk on the subject. Then the next person comes along and has their next 15 minutes of fame, even if they've just repeated what the previous individual... That's complete...
I'm
told I can't swear in the States Chamber, but I can assure you it will become very, very close to
you
swearing.
Can say my dear, you can say my love and things like that, but you have to have a special...
Well, you'll find that there's incredible pressure to conform, and anyone who doesn't finds that they're marginalised, as I found to my cost. That kind of... So it's a cosy club, and there's terrible, terrible pressure to conform.
But unfortunately,
Dissenting is not allowed.
There's an existing states assembly. Those people haven't brought in the changes that are necessary.
Correct.
The previous one to that didn't bring in the changes that are necessary. Do you honestly think, if you're two elected, do you think it will be any different? The next, you don't know who they are yet, of course.
I know. If it doesn't change in 4 years, I'll be out. I won't be standing in the next election. It's as simple as that. I mean, as I'm going in there to try and get some sense of energy, urgency, that kind of stuff into the chamber. I think I'm working with a group of people who think the same way. I think the electorate think the same way. And to be honest with you, if we're going to have low turnouts, no wonder. I mean, if we can't move the dial over the next 4 years, given that everybody goes, we're at a crossroads, we've changed things and stuff like that, and we can't move that dial, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and go, do you know what, we're not good enough to do this? Or we're not brutal enough or ruthless enough,
The guys in charge will just smile and say, hey, we're still in charge.
There is a bit of that. And it depends what you go into power for. It's to government for, and what reason you go into government. I think if you go in there just to go, oh, well, it's got a nice big label on my front which says, I'm very important, I'm Mr. Important Person, you're going in for the wrong reasons. You need to go in there because you want to see change happen, and that's what I'm trying to get that message across to my potential.
Another aspect about I've been pondering on things because some things do get into my skull, is the fact that we've had 4 years to organise ourselves. Now, it was obvious after the last election that nothing much was going to change. There was a bit more of a party element to it, but now there are party elements. But it's not. If it doesn't change, what's the public supposed to do? I mean, if there was armed insurrection here...
Yeah, well, there won't be just more disillusionment, alienation, anomia. It will continue. And whilst the economy and society melts down, people leave. People will vote with their feet. They will leave this island, the young particularly. They're heading off. They've had enough. The system hasn't allowed. Some are reasonably, they're loyal, they're patriots. But others have just decided.
Well, you introduced me to
large sections of the working class are leaving
a
already.
young woman. She's just finishing at school. She plans to go to university, but in her mind, she's determined to come into politics. She wants to come back into Jersey and be political. And from what she was saying, she is a very political person. And she says there are others out there like her who are at the youth assembly and all that. They're getting political. But do you meet them? Do you meet many youngsters who are like that? Say, look, damn it, we're going to change this.
Well, it's interesting because on Thursday we've got a meeting, one of our Let's Talk meetings, and we're doing a youth leadership one, and we're pulling 4 youngsters together who are going to give a little talk about that. And I agree with you, trying to engage. I mean, it's interesting. In St Clement, Alex Curtis has stood. He's 27. We've got a young man standing in, and is it Centrals and Helier?
St Saviour's has a young
and another guy as well. So there's a few youngsters who are trying to make the breakthrough. But one of the reactions to Alex Curtis was, "Oh, he's wet behind the ears. Why would you elect him?" Honestly, if that's the attitude of some of the electorate, well, we ain't got a hope in hell. And I think, we've just got to get past it. Having said that, subsequently I've met a number of older people who've listened to him and said, this guy's got his head screwed on, he's going to be a good candidate going forward. So I keep my fingers crossed for him and he gets through. He's up against the 2 knights, very contrasting, old enough to be his grandparents, ironically. I mean, there's a huge gulf there. So in some ways we've almost maybe missed out a generation in some ways. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe we've got the old guard going out and we've got this young guard who are there waiting in the background. It'd be interesting to see.
You've got a bit of, you understand, it's the same for Nick as well, because the electorate has changed they're getting old, and not noticeably old. And you keep saying 70% abstention, but it's greater than that because a large number are not even registered to be considered as part. So you're talking about 85% abstention.
Some blocks are 50% unregistered.
There you are.
So even after I've been there, they're probably only 60%.
And Nick, what's the numbers? I mean, we've got 10,000 people resident in St Helier. Well, how many people are on the register? Is it 5,000, 6,000?
Well, no, there's nearly 5,000 in St Helier South.
That's what I'm talking about. So you've got a population of 10,000 in St Helier South, approximately.
No, not so.
It's not as high as that? Not as high as
5,000.
You've got 5,000 registered. You've probably got another 3,000 possibly who aren't registered.
Okay, so you reckon the population then of South St Helier is around about 8,000 people?
Could well be,
that kind of number.
Yeah.
And then you cut that down to 5,000 people registered, 35% of those turn out. We're relying on 2,000 people to collect for
the people
deputies.
Who always vote,
the
same people will be turning out. And they'll be voting the same way, and of course, nothing will change.
That's the scary bit. That's the scary bit.
Point.
I mean, I think
there's no new demographic, and unfortunately, that 70% that doesn't vote, which wants change, doesn't realise what power it has were it to engage, and could elect completely different people.
Totally. Yeah.
Now, you see, the puzzling thing to me is we're into a party politics now. It's happened. But they've had 4 years for those parties to evolve, for people to evolve. They say, go on, 4 years' time, I'm going to stand for the states, to work out their policies, to work out their tactics, to get to know the public. But it's all been happening the last 2 months. They wait until they're up to the starting gate, and then they say, oh, what are we going to do? How are we going to organise it?
But also the attention span of the electorate, unfortunately, is lastminute.com, because I think everybody's running around busy lives, all sorts of things. It's kind of, oh, the election's next week. Oh, well, I'll start paying attention now, kind of thing, and see what's going on. It's only when you're in the political world and you're in it, 24/7 for the last 6 months or whatever, that you actually realise what happens. But as far as the voters who are removed, I had a long message from somebody out west who said, I'm talking to lots of people, they don't understand the system, they don't understand how the government works, they don't understand who they're voting for or what the changes meant and all the rest of it. I know that sounds bizarre and extraordinary, but it just shows you, I almost feel like David Warr has kind of put his head above the parapet, and those people who follow me are going, well, that's interesting, he's trying to get elected, I wonder what that means. It's quite, it's a little absurd, but it strikes me that seems to be a bit
well,
of that.
Of course,
To summarise, can I try and analyse it?
Yeah, sure.
The electorate desperately wants to be able to have policy choice. They want to be able to structure the states. They've never been able to do that. Parties might be the way forward, and I think that's the way it's going. Parties are now emerging because of, one, the creation of Reform, which I helped to create. The intention always was to create a party of the working class which would challenge the establishment. It hasn't happened, but anyway. The establishment is sufficiently frightened that they now have to form their own political parties. Not that Reform is a big challenge. However, what's really changed things is these new electoral districts, because you can't walk around as an independent the entirety of St Wan's and St Peter in 6 or 8 weeks. You've got to have friends, you've now got to merge together and create a unit, a group, which has similar social values, because ultimately parties, what do they represent? Socio-economic groups in a divided capitalist society. And we see the right forming several parties. How they will relate to each other and be any different from one another, I don't think.
But there's one party which doesn't go under the name of the party, and that's the Constables Party.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when people say, oh, they don't all vote the same, they are a group traditionally very conservative views.
That is the bedrock of establishment power in the island.
Exactly.
That is what prevents change. It is be political about this, like the terminology, it's the Jersey bourgeoisie, it's how they could keep control, it's how finance keeps control of this island. It has this conservative social base upon which it rests, which ensures that political change does not occur in this island, because it keeps it safe. The island is captured economically.
But they don't seem to analyse it in a political way. They seem to, it's a sort of a nostalgia. That's what more than anything. Oh, we've got to keep the Constables because we've always had the Constables.
Well, how much nostalgia do we have a weekend or so back, with the Queen and the state rolling out? People love nostalgia. They love the idea of history, heritage, and all of that kind of thing, and you have to put up with that. I find a lot of people are unsure of now is, and again, I think people don't quite understand how deputies sit alongside constables. So we see, out in the country, it's almost a lot more clear cut. The constables are, Trinity, of St John's, St Mary's, St Juan, all these things. They have bases, and the community within those parishes look towards their constable. They don't look towards the deputy. Whereas in St Helier, we have this bizarre situation where you have a constable who's almost, like a managing director of the parish, and then you have the rest of the deputies running around, but the constable still has that connection into the state. Now, there is a good. Is that still relevant? Is that still right? I just don't know. I know a lot of people really care the fact that the constable still has a vote in the chamber, but whether it's time to review that, you know what? We'll find out, because I know there's a deep unhappiness about the abandonment of an island-wide mandate. That's an absolutely, everybody you talk to is deeply disappointed with that. So it'll be really interesting how we respond in the next 4 years. And to some extent, we will respond in the next 4 years depending upon the success of the next government. If the next government starts to actually achieve something, everybody will go, God, wasn't that such a good idea? All those deputies and all those districts in competitive territories. So I think it will all be determined by how successful they are.
But you've got, you see, in your parish, your St Helier, you've got a contested election for constable by somebody fortunately standing against. There are 8 parishes where they're not having contested. They've got the constable stood up. And the presumption, as always, is that they're elected then. That's good enough.
Can I introduce another element? Commonwealth Parliamentary Association are back again, as they were in 2018. They made a very critical report then. A lot of it has been implemented. think, what's this all about? This is the British government trying to ensure that its dependencies, its overseas territories, its former colonies have good government for which it's responsible. We've seen what happened in the British Virgin Islands,
they're in
where
trouble.
they had to intervene direct rule in order to remove mafiosi criminals.
And that's ongoing. That is still going.
Yeah, that's ongoing. But the concern here is clearly that they respect Jersey as a finance centre. It's important to keep it clean, but it has to be seen to be democratic, which it clearly isn't. And this, I would say, the CPA mission is part of that oversight to get it improving, because they can see the big statistic is 70% voter abstention in St Helier, 60% island-wide. That goes to legitimacy of government and candidates.
Another aspect about this is, of course, there have been some very troubled parishes in the last. There's one now where the procurors and so on seem to be at war with their constable. There's been a constable, he'd retired as constable, who went to jail. We've got another one who was doing things that he shouldn't have been doing, and he had to resign. The Royal Court had to sack him. But these things aren't discussed, are they? Where's it? Have you had anybody say to you, but no, polite society doesn't discuss it.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, I really can't say, because obviously in the end you start commenting on individuals and you're not, and I don't know.
Well, that's it. You can't.
Yeah, no one has said to me.
Exactly.
It's not, and also it's all hearsay and rumour and all the rest of it.
Well, it's not all hearsay.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, this is a bit like saying Trump refusing to accept that he lost the election. It's truths get twisted, and unfortunately, truth is the one thing which sadly seems.
But Joe Public, if he's making he needs to have the knowledge to make the decision.
And that's what integrity is about, isn't it? Isn't that what political integrity is about? It's about people. Someone was talking about this the other day and saying how this is what I find so interesting about being given a vote. In the past, I've always been the one who's been the voter.
Exactly.
This is the first time where someone's given me, or potentially going to give me, a vote. That's a big responsibility in my book. You're representing somebody who trusts you to do the right thing. And I think if you as a politician don't have that level of integrity or self-integrity, once again, I don't think you should be in the States of Jersey. And maybe you're right, we should throw these people out the moment their integrity is doubted.
The other day, one of the meetings, I even forget which one it was, they were talking about the police test that politicians ought to take. As soon as they utter I'm going to be a candidate, they should be tested. Would you agree with that?
Well, we already are checked on, aren't we, for criminal records. So you have to announce whether you have a criminal record or not. So there is that within the form. Can you go more difficult than that? It's quite interesting. One of the things with the financial institutions is we become now, if you have any savings or whatever with your bank, you become the next level up. A PEP, is it PEP? Is that right? Yeah.
So politically exposed person.
Yeah, politically. So you're open to bribery and corruption, all the rest of it. So it's interesting, actually. Although the police may not be checking you out, financial institutions are. Interestingly.
Well, I've just for my sins read the document that was approved by the Privy Council, and it's the children's rights law. And I read it, and I would challenge either of you gentlemen to read it and then say to me, what the hell is it all about? Because you will not, I guarantee, you will not understand what it's about. How children are supposed to understand it, I do not know. But that's just one issue that will be on your desk if you have the fortune to be elected. That'll be that's something I don't know if it's been discussed. Presumably it has been discussed in the States, but it's so complex, so complex.
Is this a draft law?
Well, it's a law now. It's a law.
Invariably they're complex. I tried to look at the housing law and thought, that'd be simple.
That's right.
Oh no, it isn't. You've got to almost have to be absorbed in it. As is employment law, which I do.
That's right.
You've got to be absorbed in it before you understand all the ramifications of it.
Importing coffee, I presume that has its few problems, does it?
Yeah, it's not too bad, I have to say at the moment. It's obviously been more complex since Brexit, which is added to the complexity, and also global supply chains, a very big effect on us. In terms of the containers being in the wrong ports around the world. So there's, Brexit's been, not just Brexit, the whole COVID thing has been a huge game changer in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things I would like to say, obviously I'm not of the war generation, but I kind of get...
Only in name.
Thank you. But 39 to 45, that talk of, that generation subsequently, how they reacted to the wartime, the idea of being more careful, more considered, and all of those kind of things. You hear all these people who, saved up lots of things just in case the next war was around the corner. It's going to be interesting how we react and respond to.
My grandmother kept brown paper bags.
Yeah, just in case. Yeah. And it's interesting because it'll be interesting to see how we use the COVID. There's 2.5 years of COVID where everything sort of ground to a halt. If we can change things, on the good things that came out of it, this sense of people actually talking to each other, going out for walks and exercising, those kind of things. I think, and the arts. I mean, this is something else. There's so many people so angry about the Opera House remaining closed, and that whole arts. And the importance of the arts surely has become abundantly clear through COVID. Now, Lyndon Farnham kindly sent me the art strategy of government. I have to be honest with you, I haven't read it yet, but I'll be really interested to read it. But it's noticeable that no one's actually talking about it and how it's going to be implemented and all the rest of it. So I'm really worried that we don't learn the lessons of COVID, because I think if we could start to do that, I think we will have a better society as a result.
Politically, you two are somewhat different. You're not the same. I won't say you're poles apart, but you're...
Well, no, there's a division between left and right, but there's another division. It's between authoritarian and libertarian.
Right.
I think we're on the libertarian.
But I get the feeling that you could work together in the States. Now, they keep on saying people ought to work together.
That's why everyone should
But
vote for us.
exactly, which sounds all very nice and pleasant. But do you feel that is a reality?
I hope it is, and it's my dream is that that's the reality, because I think so much can be done, but I also think it's this process which we've gone through now shouldn't just stop if you're fortunate enough to get elected. There must be a mandate to go out there again, maybe in 6 months' time, or 100 days is always the number in politics, isn't it? What have you done after the first 100 days? To go back out there and say to the electorate, look, this is what we're doing, this is what we believed you wanted us to do. Do you feel like we're doing the right thing, or do we need to tweak it? I come back to the business models. If we're not listening to our customers and adjusting and adapting, we set out a proposal, an offer that we think is appropriate, and then our customers tell us if it's right or wrong, or should we be adapting in a different way. I believe, personally, politics is the same. I think we have to listen.
You've been there a long time, Nick. You've seen all this.
Politicians hate elections because it's about the exercise of power. It's unfortunate that elections come along every so often and they have to play the democratic game. They don't like it. They play it, they win, and that's it. They're back in power. That's how our elite has existed for many years.
We're going to have to stop because I've just noticed that 33% of our audience is fast asleep.
Thank you. No,
I hope we can get another interview in before it all ends.
Sure, by all means.
Maybe a post-election. I don't know.
Oh yeah, we should have a post-election.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have a little party here on election night.
All right,
we're gonna throw open the cafe. And
I'll bring them the camera to get some indiscreet pictures then.
Yeah, it'll be great. Great fun. Yeah.
Nice
Thank
to
you,
speak to
Mike. That's great.
Good
Cheers.
luck to both of you.
Thank you.